Sometimes a single email can destroy an entire career. Karoline Leavitt thought she had set the perfect trap for Jasmine Crockett, but the secret email in Jasmine's possession didn't just break the trap, it completely destroyed Leavitt's career. The marble floors of the East Wing Conference Center echoed with the sharp clicks of designer heels as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett made her way through the corridors of power. It was a crisp October morning in Washington, and what she had initially believed would be a routine bipartisan panel discussion on progressive policies was about to become the most explosive political confrontation of her career. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks earlier, elegantly printed on official letterhead from the American Political Institute, requesting her participation in a televised forum titled Building Bridges, Progressive and Conservative Perspectives on America's Future. The description promised a thoughtful, balanced discussion between representatives from both sides of the political spectrum, moderated by respected journalists and featuring an audience of policy experts and concerned citizens. Jasmine had accepted readily. These kinds of civil, substantive discussions were exactly what American political discourse needed more of, and she relished the opportunity to present progressive policies in a format that prioritized facts over rhetoric. Her staff had spent days preparing talking points, policy briefings, and statistical analyses that would demonstrate the real-world benefits of progressive initiatives. But as she approached the conference room doors, something felt wrong. The energy in the hallway was different than what she had expected. Instead of the collegial atmosphere typical of academic policy discussions, there was an electric tension in the air, the kind that preceded political combat, rather than scholarly debate. Her first indication that something had changed came when she noticed the media presence. What had been described as a small, focused discussion was surrounded by satellite trucks, professional camera crews, and reporters from every major conservative outlet in the country. Fox News, The Daily Caller, Newsmax, One America News, every right-wing media organization that had ever criticized her work was represented in force. More concerning was what she didn't see. Any representatives from moderate or progressive media outlets. No CNN, no MSNBC, no NPR. The media landscape outside the conference center looked like a conservative convention rather than a balanced policy forum. Her chief of staff, Marcus, who had accompanied her to the event, pulled out his phone and began checking the latest information about the forum. His expression grew increasingly concerned as he scrolled through social media posts and news announcements. "Jasmine," he said quietly, "something's not right. The promotional materials online are different from what we received. The title has been changed to Unmasking the Progressive Agenda, and the description talks about exposing the radical left's true intentions." Jasmine felt her stomach drop. This wasn't going to be a policy discussion. It was going to be an ambush designed to create viral content for conservative media outlets. She was walking into a trap that had been carefully constructed to make her look radical, unprepared, or defensive. As they approached the entrance, a young staffer with a clipboard and an overly bright smile intercepted them. "Congresswoman Crockett, we're so excited you're here. If you could just follow me, we'll get you set up for the discussion." The woman led them through a maze of corridors toward what had been described as an intimate conference room. But when the doors opened, Jasmine found herself facing something that looked more like a television studio than a policy forum. Professional lighting rigs had been installed, multiple camera angles were positioned for maximum visual impact, and a live streaming setup was broadcasting to what appeared to be thousands of online viewers. The audience consisted entirely of individuals she didn't recognize. No policy experts, no academic researchers, no citizens who had been described in the original invitation. Instead, the room was filled with what appeared to be conservative activists, political operatives, and media personalities who were clearly there to create content rather than engage in substantive discussion. At the center of it all, standing behind a podium with the confidence of someone who owned the room, was Karoline Leavitt, the former Trump administration press secretary who had built her post-government career on aggressive political combat and viral social media content. Leavitt looked every inch the professional media performer, perfectly styled hair, camera-ready makeup, and a red folder that seemed to be positioned specifically for visual impact. Her expression combined mock sincerity with predatory anticipation, the look of someone who believed they were about to achieve a career-defining victory. "Ladies and gentlemen," Leavitt announced into the microphone, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of a cable news host. "Today we welcome a distinguished guest, a woman whose passion for chaos has become legendary." She paused for dramatic effect, allowing the room to chuckle at what was clearly a prepared line designed to establish the hostile tone of the proceedings. "Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett," she continued with mock reverence, "the perfect embodiment of progressive compassion and progressive collapse." The introduction was a clear signal that this would not be a good faith discussion. Leavitt was positioning herself as the reasonable conservative voice, exposing the radical liberal agenda, while casting Jasmine as an extremist whose ideas were inherently destructive. Jasmine remained calm, but internally her mind was racing. She realized that she had been lured into what amounted to a political hit job designed to create embarrassing footage that would be edited and distributed across conservative media platforms. Every question would be loaded, every response would be taken out of context, and every moment would be crafted to make her appear radical or unprepared. But Jasmine Crockett had not survived years in Texas politics and risen to prominence in Congress by being easily intimidated. As she took her seat at the panel table, she was already formulating a strategy that would turn this attempted ambush into an opportunity to expose the very tactics being used against her. Before she could even settle into her chair, the assault began. The lights dimmed with theatrical precision, and a massive screen descended from the ceiling, 10 feet wide, ultra-high definition, and positioned for maximum visual impact. What appeared next wasn't context or introduction. It was character assassination by video editing. The screen flickered to life with carefully selected clips of Jasmine speaking in various settings, but the footage had been manipulated to remove context and create the most inflammatory possible interpretation of her words. They showed her saying, "Why are cops above accountability?" but cut off her next sentence that provided crucial context. They displayed her statement that the system needs to be dismantled, but removed the grieving mother beside her and the detailed policy proposals she had been presenting. Each clip was designed to maximize outrage while minimizing understanding. The full debates were gone, the supporting evidence was missing, and the real-world context that gave her statements meaning had been surgically removed. What remained was a weaponized echo chamber designed to confirm every negative stereotype about progressive politicians. The video montage was not a highlight reel. It was a character assassination stitched together with the precision of a political surgeon. Images jumped from congressional hearings to protest footage, with sinister music and dramatic editing designed to create an impression of chaos and extremism. As the video played, Jasmine felt the weight of manipulation settling over the room. This wasn't about policy differences or philosophical disagreements. This was about creating viral content that would be shared across social media platforms to reinforce existing prejudices and generate outrage clicks. But something interesting happened as she watched the video. Instead of feeling defensive or angry, she felt a sense of clarity settling over her. The very fact that they needed to manipulate her words so extensively proved that her actual positions were reasonable and defensible. The elaborate production indicated that they feared a fair fight and needed to create artificial advantages. More importantly, she realized that this entire production was being broadcast live, which meant that millions of people were watching not just the edited attacks, but also her real-time response. If she could expose the manipulation tactics being used against her, she could turn this attempted ambush into a teaching moment about media literacy and political manipulation. When the video finally ended and the lights came back up, Leavitt turned to her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So, Congresswoman Crockett, how do you respond to the evidence of your radical agenda that we've just presented?" It was the perfect setup for a defensive response that could be edited to make her look angry, unprepared, or extremist. Any attempt to explain the missing context would be portrayed as making excuses, while any passionate defense of her positions could be framed as unhinged radicalism. But Jasmine had spent years as a defense attorney, and she recognized a loaded question when she heard one. More importantly, she had come prepared for exactly this kind of manipulation, though she hadn't expected it to be quite so blatant. She reached into her briefcase with deliberate calm, her movements slow and measured. The red folder she extracted was thick, professional, and clearly well organized, not the glossy empty prop that Leavitt had been using for visual effect, but the kind of substantive documentation that serious policymakers bring to serious discussions. "Ms. Leavitt," she said, her voice carrying the calm authority that had made her reputation in Congress, "before we discuss my policy positions, I think we should talk about something else, something that I think the American people deserve to know about." She opened the folder with practiced precision, revealing not talking points or policy briefs, but something far more explosive: printed email communications that would fundamentally change the trajectory of the entire confrontation. "You see," Jasmine continued, her voice remaining steady as she prepared to detonate the bomb she had been carrying, "I've been wondering why this event felt so different from what was originally described. Why the title changed, why the audience composition shifted, why the media presence was so one-sided." She paused, allowing the tension in the room to build as viewers, both in person and online, sensed that something significant was about to happen. "And then, last night, I received some very interesting information from a source inside your organization, someone who apparently felt that the American people deserved to know what was really being planned here today." The room, which had been buzzing with anticipatory energy, suddenly fell silent. Leavitt's confident expression faltered slightly as she realized that something was happening that hadn't been scripted in her elaborate production. Jasmine stood up slowly, her movement drawing every eye and every camera lens in the room. She walked to the presentation screen that had just been used to attack her, and with a few quick taps on the control panel, replaced the attack video with something far more damaging: a series of internal emails that laid bare the entire manipulation operation. The first email appeared on the screen, crystal clear and undeniably authentic. The subject line read, "Crockett Event Production Guidelines." The sender was listed as Deputy Communications Director, and the recipient was Karoline.Leavitt at AmericanPoliticalInstitute.org. But it was the content of the email that created an explosion of silence in the room. "Karolina, per our discussion, here are the confirmed technical specifications for tomorrow's Crockett event. Ensure Crockett's microphone level is set 15% lower than standard to create perception of weakness. Cue the defund video compilation immediately upon her entrance. Audience composition has been finalized, all friendlies, no neutrals. Camera angles positioned to maximize unflattering shots during questioning. Post-production team standing by for immediate clip creation and distribution. The objective is to create the perception of control while maintaining plausible deniability about production manipulation. She should feel off balance from the moment she enters. Let me know if you need any adjustments to the script. Best, Deputy Communications." The email hung on the screen like evidence in a courtroom, each word a nail in the coffin of Leavitt's credibility. The clinical language made the manipulation even more damning. This wasn't spontaneous political theater. It was premeditated character assassination with detailed technical specifications. The silence in the room was deafening. No one moved, no one coughed, no one even seemed to breathe. The audience, which had come expecting to watch Jasmine Crockett being humiliated, was instead witnessing the complete exposure of the very manipulation tactics that had been used to create that humiliation. Jasmine didn't need to raise her voice or show emotion. The evidence spoke for itself, and its impact was devastating precisely because it was so matter-of-fact about the deliberate deception being perpetrated on the American people. "Ensure Crockett's mic is lowered," she read aloud, her voice calm but carrying clearly throughout the silent room. "Cue the defund clip." She paused, letting each phrase land with surgical precision. "Create the perception of control." She turned from the screen to face Leavitt, who had gone pale behind her professional makeup. "Ms. Leavitt, is this the kind of building bridges and respectful dialogue that your organization promised the American people?" But Jasmine wasn't finished. With another tap on the control panel, a second email appeared on the screen. This one was even more damaging because it revealed the broader context of the manipulation campaign. Subject: Crockett Trap, Media Distribution Strategy. Team: Phase 1, live event is locked and loaded. Phase 2, post-production teams are standing by with the following deliverables. 30-second unhinged moments package for social media. 90-second extremist agenda exposed segment for cable news. 5-minute complete breakdown compilation for YouTube. Distribution partners confirmed for immediate release: Fox News, Tucker segment, Daily Wire, Shapiro Show, PragerU, rapid response videos, conservative Twitter network, coordinated hashtag campaign. Remember, the goal isn't to debate policy, it's to create viral content that reinforces existing narratives about progressive extremism. Focus on emotion, not substance. The woman walked into our trap. Let's make sure she doesn't walk out of it intact. Strategic Communications Team. The second email was even more devastating than the first, because it revealed that this wasn't just about manipulating a single event. It was about creating a coordinated media campaign designed to destroy Jasmine's reputation across multiple platforms simultaneously. The phrase, "the woman walked into our trap," was particularly damaging because it showed the personal animus behind what was supposed to be a professional policy discussion. This wasn't about ideological differences. It was about attempting to destroy a political opponent through deception and manipulation. The reaction in the room was immediate and visceral. Several audience members audibly gasped. A reporter in the front row dropped his notepad. Across the second row, a press assistant's fingers froze above her laptop keyboard, paralyzed by the magnitude of what was being revealed. But the most significant reaction came from the live streaming audience. The chat feed, which had been filled with supportive comments for Leavitt's planned ambush, suddenly exploded with outrage about the manipulation tactics being exposed. Viewers who had come to watch a conservative takedown of a progressive politician were instead witnessing a master class in media manipulation and political dirty tricks. Jasmine allowed the full weight of the evidence to settle over the room before she spoke again. When she did, her voice carried the authority of someone who had just fundamentally shifted the balance of power in the room. "Ms. Leavitt," she said, her tone professional but edged with steel, "you invited me here under false pretenses. You changed the format, the audience, and the entire purpose of this event without informing me. You manipulated the technical setup to create artificial disadvantages, and you plan to use this deception to create viral content that would be distributed across conservative media networks." She gestured to the emails still displayed on the screen. "This isn't political debate. This is political warfare conducted through deception, and the American people deserve to know when they're being manipulated." The confrontation had reached a tipping point where traditional political responses were inadequate. Leavitt couldn't deny the emails because they were clearly authentic and contained too many specific details to be fabricated. She couldn't attack the source because doing so would only draw more attention to the content, and she couldn't pivot to policy discussions because the entire foundation of her credibility had been destroyed. Instead, she made the fatal mistake of trying to minimize the significance of what had been revealed. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said, her voice noticeably less confident than it had been at the beginning of the event, "all media events involve production planning. This is standard practice in political communications." It was exactly the wrong response because it confirmed the authenticity of the emails while trying to normalize behavior that most Americans would find deeply troubling. Jasmine's response was swift and devastating. "Ms. Leavitt, there's a difference between event planning and deliberate deception. Standard practice doesn't include lowering your opponent's microphone to create a perception of weakness. Standard practice doesn't include coordinating with media outlets to create predetermined narratives regardless of what actually happens during the discussion." She walked closer to Leavitt, not aggressively, but with the confidence of someone who had just won a decisive victory. "What you've done here today isn't political communication, it's propaganda production. And thanks to your own emails, the American people can see exactly how the sausage gets made." The impact of Jasmine's revelation extended far beyond the immediate confrontation. The emails she had revealed provided concrete evidence of the kind of media manipulation that many Americans suspected, but had never seen documented so clearly. The clinical, businesslike tone of the communications made them even more damaging, because they showed how routine and systematic this kind of deception had become. More importantly, the revelation came at a time when trust in media institutions was already at historic lows. The exposure of deliberate manipulation tactics by a supposedly reputable political organization provided ammunition for broader discussions about media literacy, political honesty, and the responsibilities of public figures to engage in good faith debate. The live streaming aspect of the event meant that the revelation was witnessed in real time by hundreds of thousands of viewers across multiple platforms. Unlike carefully edited and produced content that could be spun or recontextualized, this was raw, unfiltered exposure of political manipulation happening live on camera. The immediate aftermath of the email revelation was chaos. Leavitt's team scrambled to end the live stream, but the damage was already done. The screenshots and video clips were being shared across social media platforms faster than they could be contained. Conservative influencers who had been promoting the event suddenly found themselves trying to distance themselves from the manipulative tactics that had been exposed. But the most significant impact was on public discourse about media manipulation and political honesty. The emails provided a concrete example of how political content is manufactured rather than organically created, and they demonstrated the sophisticated techniques used to shape public opinion through deception rather than persuasion. Within hours of the confrontation, direct media manipulation was trending on social media platforms, with users sharing their own experiences of political events that had felt manufactured or manipulative. The broader conversation extended beyond partisan politics to fundamental questions about how democratic discourse should function in a digital age. Academic researchers who studied political communication seized on the emails as a case study in how modern political manipulation operates. The detailed technical specifications for microphone levels, camera angles, and audience composition provided unprecedented insight into the mechanics of political theater. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a professor of political communication at Georgetown University, appeared on multiple news programs to discuss the implications of the revelation. What Representative Crockett exposed, she explained during an interview with Anderson Cooper, is the industrialization of political manipulation. This isn't just spin or bias. It's the systematic manufacture of political content designed to deceive audiences about the nature of what they're watching. She continued, "The emails show that every aspect of the event was engineered to create a specific outcome, regardless of what the participants actually said or did. That's not journalism, and it's not even political advocacy. It's propaganda production." The revelation also had immediate consequences for Karoline Leavitt's career and reputation. The American Political Institute, faced with evidence of systematic deception, announced that they were reviewing their relationship with Leavitt and implementing new standards for event transparency. More damaging were the responses from conservative media figures who had been scheduled to appear with Leavitt in future events. Several prominent hosts canceled scheduled appearances, citing concerns about being associated with the manipulative tactics that had been exposed. Fox News, which had been listed in the emails as a distribution partner for the planned attack content, issued a statement saying they were reviewing their editorial standards and would not be airing content related to this event. The cancellations and distancing moves created a cascade effect that effectively ended Leavitt's career as a media personality. Without the support of major conservative outlets, and with her credibility destroyed by the email revelations, she found herself unable to book speaking engagements or media appearances. But perhaps the most significant long-term impact was on how political events were covered and consumed by the public. The exposure of the detailed manipulation tactics made audiences more skeptical of produced political content and more demanding of transparency from event organizers. News organizations began implementing new standards for covering political events, including requirements for disclosure about production techniques, audience composition, and technical specifications. The goal was to help audiences understand the difference between genuine political discourse and manufactured political theater. 3 months after the confrontation, Jasmine was invited to deliver the keynote address at the National Conference on Media Literacy, where she used the experience to discuss broader issues of democratic discourse and political manipulation. "What happened in that room wasn't really about me or Ms. Leavitt," she told the audience. "It was about the fundamental question of whether democratic discourse can survive in an age of sophisticated manipulation techniques." She outlined specific recommendations for media consumers, including questions to ask about event production, warning signs of manufactured content, and resources for fact-checking political claims. "The goal isn't to make people cynical about all political communication," she explained. "The goal is to help people distinguish between genuine discourse and manufactured theater. Democracy depends on informed citizens, and informed citizens need to understand how they're being targeted for manipulation." The speech was widely praised by media literacy advocates and education professionals, who began incorporating the Leavitt emails into their curricula as examples of how political manipulation operates in practice. The long-term consequences of the email revelation extended far beyond any individual political career. It had provided concrete evidence of how modern political manipulation works, sparked broader conversations about media literacy and democratic discourse, and created new standards for transparency in political communication. Most importantly, it had demonstrated that even sophisticated manipulation campaigns could be exposed and defeated when confronted with evidence, courage, and strategic communication. The David versus Goliath narrative of a single congresswoman exposing a coordinated manipulation campaign resonated with Americans across the political spectrum who were tired of being deceived by political operatives. 6 months after the confrontation, when asked to reflect on the experience and its impact, Jasmine focused on the broader lessons rather than the personal victory. "The emails were just evidence," she said during an interview with 60 Minutes. "The real story was about what happens when people demand honesty from their political institutions. Those emails existed because someone inside that organization felt that the American people deserved to know the truth about how they were being manipulated." She paused, considering her words carefully. The lesson isn't that all political communication is dishonest. It's that citizens have both the right and the responsibility to demand transparency from people who want their votes, their attention, and their trust. The confrontation had begun with an attempted ambush designed to generate viral content and destroy a political opponent. It ended with a comprehensive exposure of political manipulation that changed how Americans thought about media literacy, democratic discourse, and the responsibilities of public figures to engage honestly with the citizens they serve. The emails that destroyed Karoline Leavitt's career had done more than expose one person's dishonesty. They had provided a roadmap for recognizing and resisting political manipulation in all its forms. And at the center of it all was the recognition that sometimes the most powerful weapon against deception is simply the courage to expose it to the light. The immediate aftermath of Jasmine's email revelation created ripple effects that extended far beyond the conference room where the confrontation had taken place. Within minutes of the live stream ending, social media platforms exploded with reactions, analyses, and discussions that would fundamentally reshape how Americans understood political communication and media manipulation. The first major development came when investigative journalists across the country began reaching out to their sources within conservative media organizations, seeking additional information about similar manipulation tactics. The detailed nature of the emails Jasmine had revealed suggested that the Leavitt operation was not an isolated incident, but rather part of a broader pattern of deceptive practices that had become normalized within certain political circles. Amanda Chen, a veteran political reporter for The Washington Post, had been covering conservative media operations for over a decade. The specificity of the technical details in the leaked emails, microphone levels, camera angles, audience composition, reminded her of conversations she had heard at industry conferences and background briefings over the years. The emails Crockett revealed weren't amateur hour, Chen explained to her editor during an emergency meeting called to discuss follow-up coverage. The level of sophistication suggests this kind of operation has been refined through extensive practice. We need to find out how widespread these techniques have become. Chen's investigation, which would be published 3 days later under the headline, "The Manipulation Playbook: How Political Theater Replaced Political Discourse," revealed that the tactics exposed in the Leavitt emails were being used by political operatives across the ideological spectrum, though with varying levels of sophistication and coordination. The investigation uncovered internal documents from multiple political organizations detailing similar manipulation techniques: strategic lighting to create psychological advantages, audio engineering to subtly influence audience perception, and sophisticated audience curation to create desired reactions during live events. Most damaging was Chen's discovery of a training manual used by a prominent political consulting firm that included detailed instructions for what they called perception management during media events. The manual, titled "Controlling the Narrative: Advanced Techniques for Political Theater," contained chapters on environmental psychology in political settings, technical manipulation for strategic advantage, and post-production exploitation of live events. The training manual included case studies of successful manipulation campaigns, complete with before and after polling data showing how carefully orchestrated events had shifted public opinion on specific issues. The clinical approach to deception was striking. These weren't passionate political advocates using emotion to persuade voters, but professional manipulators using psychological techniques to deceive audiences about the nature of what they were witnessing. Meanwhile, the whistleblower who had provided the emails to Jasmine began reaching out to other journalists with additional information about the broader network of political manipulation operations. The source, who remained anonymous but provided extensive documentation, revealed that the American Political Institute was just one node in a larger ecosystem of organizations dedicated to creating manufactured political content. The whistleblower's information led to the discovery of what investigators would later term the Theater Network, a loose confederation of political organizations, media companies, and consulting firms that specialized in creating events designed to look like genuine political discourse while actually functioning as elaborate propaganda productions. The network included event production companies that specialized in creating authentic political theater, casting agencies that provided carefully selected audiences for political events, technical firms that provided sophisticated audio and visual manipulation services, distribution networks that ensured manufactured content reached target audiences across multiple platforms, research organizations that studied the psychological impact of different manipulation techniques. Dr. Robert Williams, a professor of psychology at Stanford University who studied political manipulation, was contacted by multiple news organizations seeking expert analysis of the Leavitt emails and their broader implications. What we're seeing, Dr. Williams explained during an interview with CNN, is the industrialization of deception. These aren't spontaneous political events where opposing viewpoints clash. They're carefully choreographed productions designed to create predetermined outcomes regardless of what the participants actually say or do. He continued, "The level of psychological sophistication is remarkable. They're using techniques developed for marketing and propaganda, but applying them to what audiences believe is genuine political discourse. It's a fundamental corruption of democratic communication." Dr. Williams's analysis of the emails revealed multiple layers of manipulation that most viewers wouldn't consciously notice, but that would subconsciously influence their perception of the participants. The 15% microphone reduction, for example, would create a subtle impression of weakness without being obvious enough to trigger conscious skepticism. The strategic camera positioning described in the emails was designed to use principles of visual psychology to make Jasmine appear isolated and defensive, while positioning Leavitt as confident and authoritative. Even the lighting specifications were calculated to create subtle psychological advantages that would influence audience perception without their awareness. The revelation of these sophisticated manipulation techniques sparked outrage among media literacy advocates and democratic reform organizations. The National Association for Media Literacy Education announced an emergency conference to address what they termed the crisis of manufactured political discourse. Sarah Peterson, the organization's executive director, issued a statement calling the Leavitt emails a wake-up call for American democracy. She explained, "When citizens can't distinguish between genuine political debate and manufactured theater, democratic discourse becomes impossible. We need immediate action to restore transparency and honesty to political communication." The organization announced a new initiative called Truth in Political Theater, which would work to establish disclosure requirements for political events, similar to the advertising disclaimers required for commercial content. The goal was to help audiences understand when they were watching genuine discourse versus manufactured content. The initiative gained surprising support from some conservative organizations who recognized that manipulation techniques could be used against their candidates as easily as for them. The American Conservative Union issued a statement supporting transparency in political communication and calling for honest debate based on genuine differences rather than manufactured controversy. However, the most significant development came when the Federal Communications Commission announced that it was opening an investigation into whether the manipulation techniques revealed in the emails violated broadcasting standards for live political content. FCC Commissioner Janet Reynolds, who had been appointed by a Democratic president but had a reputation for bipartisan approach to media regulation, announced that the commission would examine whether events like the one Leavitt had organized constituted fraudulent broadcasting under existing federal regulations. When audiences believe they're watching genuine political discourse but are actually viewing carefully manufactured propaganda, that raises serious questions about broadcasting integrity, Reynolds explained during a commission hearing. We need to determine whether existing regulations are adequate to protect the public from this kind of deception. The FCC investigation would eventually lead to new regulations requiring disclosure of production techniques used in live political broadcasts, including requirements for revealing technical manipulation, audience curation, and post-production plans that might influence public perception of the content. But perhaps the most immediate impact came from the response of major social media platforms, which recognized that the manipulation techniques revealed in the emails could be used to create viral content that would spread false impressions across their networks. Twitter announced new policies requiring disclosure tags for political content that used sophisticated production techniques, while Facebook implemented algorithms designed to detect and flag potentially manipulated political content. YouTube created a new category for political theater that would be labeled separately from genuine political discourse. The platform responses were controversial because they required making subjective judgments about the authenticity of political content, but they reflected growing recognition that manufactured political theater was undermining democratic discourse across digital platforms. Meanwhile, the personal consequences for Karoline Leavitt continued to mount. The American Political Institute, faced with mounting pressure from donors and board members, announced that Leavitt's contract had been terminated effective immediately. The organization issued a statement saying it was committed to honest political discourse and would be implementing new standards to ensure transparency in all future events. More damaging for Leavitt's career were the responses from media figures who had previously supported her work. Tucker Carlson, who had been mentioned in the emails as a distribution partner for the planned attack content, issued a statement distancing himself from the manipulation tactics and announcing that his show would no longer feature Leavitt as a guest. "I believe in aggressive political debate," Carlson said during his show, "but I don't support deceiving audiences about the nature of what they're watching. If you need to manipulate microphone levels and camera angles to win a political argument, maybe your argument isn't as strong as you think it is." The statement was particularly damaging because Carlson had been one of Leavitt's strongest supporters in conservative media, and his public distancing sent a signal to other conservative figures that association with Leavitt had become politically toxic. Within a week of the email revelation, Leavitt found herself effectively blacklisted from major conservative media outlets. Scheduled appearances were canceled, speaking engagements were terminated, and consulting contracts were voided. The sophisticated manipulation operation she had built became a liability that no reputable organization wanted to be associated with. The rapid collapse of Leavitt's career became a case study in how quickly political reputations could be destroyed in the digital age when concrete evidence of deception was revealed. Political scientists who studied the incident noted that the email revelations were particularly devastating because they provided undeniable proof of intentional manipulation, rather than the typical he said, she said controversies that characterized most political scandals. Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, who studied political communication at Harvard University, wrote an analysis of the Leavitt incident that became required reading in political science courses across the country. The Crockett-Leavitt confrontation represents a watershed moment in American political communication, Dr. Martinez wrote. It demonstrates both the sophistication of modern manipulation techniques and the potential for those techniques to be exposed and defeated when confronted with evidence and courage. The long-term impact on political discourse was significant and measurable. Polling conducted 6 months after the incident showed that Americans across the political spectrum had become more skeptical of produced political content and more demanding of transparency from political organizations. A survey by the Pew Research Center found that 73% of Americans believed political events should be required to disclose their production techniques, while 68% said they were more likely to trust political figures who participated in unproduced, spontaneous discussions rather than carefully orchestrated events. The emails were just evidence, she told the graduating class. The real story was about what happens when people refuse to accept deception as normal. Those emails existed because someone inside that organization couldn't live with participating in the systematic deception of the American people. She concluded, "Your generation has the tools and the responsibility to demand better from your political institutions. You have access to information, platforms for communication, and networks for organizing that previous generations could never have imagined. The question is whether you'll use those tools to build a more honest democracy or whether you'll accept manipulation as the price of political engagement." The speech was viewed over 2 million times online and became a rallying cry for young Americans who were determined to create a political culture based on transparency and authentic discourse rather than sophisticated manipulation and manufactured theater. What do you think about Jasmine Crockett's exposure of Karoline Leavitt's media manipulation tactics? Should all political events be required to disclose their production techniques and audience composition? Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know what other examples of media manipulation you've witnessed. Subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay updated on political courage that exposes deception and demands transparency. Your voice matters in holding media figures accountable for their manipulation tactics.